Hey there. This video will be the first in a series where I go over and give my thoughts on the job changes for Final Fantasy XIV's Endwalker expansion. I don't know if I'll make one for all 19 jobs, as I am unfamiliar with some, especially the healers, and I don't know if my input on those jobs is warranted. All that being said, since this is the first in the series, it wouldn't feel right to start with any jobs save for my main since Heavensward Early Access, Dark Knight. Now, if you watch my live streams, twitch.tv/Bombokobo, Monday through Friday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, you might know where this is going, but stick around anyway, because this will be a little more thought out than my usual rants on the topic. I'll be using two metrics to explain my thoughts, those being viability and satisfaction. I feel like that's the best way to explain why I feel the way I do, not only about Dark Knight, but also the other jobs going forward. Now, in Endgame, single boss fight content, Dark Knight is viable, able to perform everything expected of its role. The Blackest Night, TBN, is still good for soaking damage from a single big hit. It is still a damage loss to use too often, which is a little janky, but tank busters are typically spread out enough so that doesn't become an issue. The stat squish does hurt the mitigation provided by TBN a little, being that the shield we get's based off of a percentage of our max HP, and that went down, but you don't really notice it so much in Trial and Raid, especially since you almost always pair TBN with another form of mitigation, likely Oblation, one of Dark Knight's new abilities in Endwalker. Oblation gives 10% mitigation for 10 seconds and has 2 charges on a 60-second recharge timer. Dark Knight, at the time of recording, does the most damage of any tank in Endwalker. This is something that I thought I would be happier about, but I'll get into why I'm not a little later. The other new abilities Dark Knight got in Endwalker are Salt and Darkness, a 500 potency off-global cooldown AoE that can only be used after Salted Earth and hits enemies inside the area of effect of Salted Earth. So it's a 500 potency AoE on a 90-second cooldown. And Dark Knight's level 90 capstone ability, Shadowbringer, a 600 potency off-global cooldown line AoE that has 2 charges, also on a 60-second recharge timer, and can only be used when Darkside is active. A stipulation that I think is a little odd, since when is Darkside not active? Shadowbringer does good damage. The AoE does feel a bit narrow, but it's not enough to where it makes it unwieldy. But let's talk about those new skills for a bit. We'll start with Oblation. Oblation is not satisfying to use. The ability looks great. It's probably my favorite looking defensive cooldown. However, that only makes how lackluster it is sting more. The act of pairing TBN and Oblation to self-mitigate is a harsh reminder that the other tanks all got something that's effectively the same, just one button, and does more. Those mitigation upgrades, and consequently the dissatisfaction for Dark Knight, applies to using your mitigation on allies as well. Want to mitigate for the main tank? Double weave that mitigation. Need to save a healer or DPS who mispositioned? Double weave those mitigations. It's frustrating because Heart of Corundrum gives a 900 potency heal, 30% damage mitigation. Bloodwetting and Nascent Flash give 400 potency shield, 400 potency cures on hit for its duration, and 20% mitigation. Both are a 25-second cooldown and cost nothing to use. Holy Sheltron gives the Paladin 100% block rate for 8 seconds, which works out to about 18% mitigation, and an extra 15% mitigation for the first 4 seconds, and a 250 potency hot for 12 seconds, and costs 50 Oath Gauge, a resource that is generated by auto attacks and has no spending option that does damage. Intervention, the Holy Sheltron for a Friend ability, costs Paladin 50 Oath Gauge, which again generates on auto attack. It gives the target 10% damage reduction for 8 seconds, plus another 10% reduction if Rampart or Sentinel were active when it was used, plus an extra 10% mitigation for the first 4 seconds, plus a 250 potency hot for 12 seconds. Each of those abilities are infinitely more satisfying to use on yourself or an ally than Oblation or TBN. They are a single button press, they offer more mitigation, they restore health, they don't run the risk of reducing your damage done. Meanwhile, Dark Knight gets to either A, TBN and risk having 3,000 less MP for their 1 or 2 minute burst window, B, give a measly 10% mitigation, which very well may not be enough to actually save anyone, or C, all of the above. This is not satisfying gameplay. It does work. It works. It's a viable option. It's not fun to do, and it doesn't feel good to do, but it does work. Moving on, we have Salt and Darkness. This move is boring in every way. It doesn't look good. The delay between Salted Earth being dropped and the ability to cast Salt and Darkness is more than your global cooldown, which feels awkward, but isn't ultimately a problem. You just weave them between 2 different GCDs. The problem is that this is yet another OGCD that Dark Knight must squeeze into their opener and re-opener. Why not just upgrade Salted Earth to do more damage, or to proc Salt and Darkness after a set duration or on its expiration? This move isn't terrible, but it's boring. So much so that I almost forgot to include it in this video. Finally, we reach Shadowbringer, the level 90 ability named after arguably the best expansion. Sadly, I cannot say that this lives up to the name. The particle effect is ugly, the sound effect sounds like a more annoying version of the old Dark Art sound effect, and it overloads your opener and 2 minute burst window with even more OGCDs that need to be double weaved in between blood spillers while juggling movement mechanics and mitigation for tank busters or raid wides. Yes, this ability pushes Dark Knight over the edge, pun intended, making it the highest DPS tank job for now. But instead of feeling good to use, it adds to the already stressful finger gymnastics required to play Dark Knight. For the first time ever, Dark Knight, a job that had more buttons removed from it than any other job, has too many buttons. Speaking of the opener, Dark Knight's opener is incredibly busy. Here's a picture of what it looks like, courtesy of the Balanced Discord server. There are 14 off globals that need to be double weaved between 7 weapon skills. Remember when people said that Gunbreaker was too busy because of all of its weaving? It still has that. It has more now. Let's look at their opener. 10 off global cooldowns and only 3 double weaves, yet somehow Gunbreaker is still the job people say is too fast and busy to play. At least Continuation is more satisfying to use than the third Edge of Shadow. Dark Knight is actually busier in its opener than any melee DPS job, and it gets even busier when you factor in how the Savage Raid fights have tank busters that go off during the opener, putting the number of buttons pushed by a Dark Knight main tank up by at least 1. The stress associated with this is amplified by one of the biggest problems with Dark Knight in Endwalker, that being Blood Weapon. For some reason, Blood Weapon doesn't work on a charge system like Delirium, Inner Release, or Requiescat, despite being functionally the same. All of that being said, Dark Knight is viable in endgame content. It may not be satisfying for some, myself included, but it can do the job. However, in dungeons, Dark Knight really struggles. Now, people all over the Reddit keep saying things like, "No one cares about casual content. The devs never balance around casual content. Who cares about dungeons?" I care, and the devs have balanced around casual content. Remember Flash? Flash was removed solely because it was awful to use in dungeons. An AoE threat generation tool doesn't do anything for endgame raids or trials, only in dungeons. Remember in Heaven's Ward when Death Flare got nerfed to have damage fall off on multiple targets? That was because of how fast summoners could clear trash in dungeons, and how often they would pull aggro from tanks, mainly Paladin, because of how bad Flash was. There is precedent for balance changes that primarily affect dungeons and casual content. Most of the player base for FF14 are casual players who do casual content after all. In the case of Dark Knight, its lack of self-healing tools make mob packs in dungeons incredibly dangerous if the DPS can't dispatch them quickly enough. Dark Knight does high damage and has some good AoE tools, but because TBN costs mana, using it inherently makes mobs die slower, but not using it makes the Dark Knight die faster. And if the DPS cannot dispatch your foes in roughly 45 seconds, the Dark Knight is out of mitigation and mana, a case which often leads to a wipe, something that isn't fun for any player. Again, this is a problem with satisfaction, not viability. Dark Knight is still perfectly viable in dungeons, as they are in all other content. The problem is that they have to work so much harder than every other tank just to survive. All of the old problems with Dark Knight still exist too. Your AoE combo and unbend are still spells, and thus not affected by the skill speed you're forced to meld in order to maximize blood weapon GCDs. Living Dead is still a burden on the party because it gives you a Doom debuff when you use it. This problem is slightly worse now, because Sage is virtually unable to heal the deficit in time. Superbolide and Holmgang having their durations extended to 10 seconds makes Living Dead even more undesirable than it already was. TBN is still a DPS loss if you use it more than once in 60 seconds because Dark Knight loses an Edge of Shadow inside party buffs. All of this, in my opinion, leads to the most unsatisfying iteration of Dark Knight since its inclusion in FF14, which is really sad because it finally does more damage than Warrior. It is still viable, and I have been playing it in Savage raids, although that's mostly because my co-tank is a Warrior main and I haven't sat down to learn the Gunbreaker rotation yet. I have a theory about Dark Knight that goes like this. Dark Knight is designed so that it is as bad as any tank is allowed to get. It is still viable in all content, but it doesn't do anything better than any of the other tanks. Point of fact, the other 3 tanks can do everything a Dark Knight does as good or better. Yes, as of right now, Dark Knight does the most single target DPS out of the 4 tank jobs in endgame content, but I doubt that will last very long, especially with the rumors about Paladin damage buffs coming in patch 6.08. But that's just a theory. A depressing theory. And those are just my thoughts on the current state of Dark Knight in FF14. The TLDR of which is viable, but incredibly unsatisfying. I really do hope Dark Knight gets some matter of buffs or some sort of rework to address the lackluster game feel that comes with playing Dark Knight in the not-too-distant future. I just want to have fun playing my favorite job in my favorite game again. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe. It would really mean a lot to me. While you're at it, tell me in the comments how you feel about Dark Knight or your main job in Endwalker. I'll have another one of these videos up sometime soon. Please look forward to it.